Sometimes I wish that I had the excitement of little kids just going through life. I don't know if you've ever felt that way. We've had a couple of kids sick this weekend, and now our 4-year-old is like ready to go, ready to take on the world, and like just where everybody else is tired and exhausted. But he's ready. And then I think about every day when I drop him off at daycare, and it's always like exciting. Usually it's the good kind of exciting where he's excited to play with his friends, and then the friends are excited to see him, and in more days than not, one of the other friends, they'll come running up and needing to tell me something, needing to show me something. Maybe it's their new superhero shirt, or trying to say something that they had for breakfast, or whatever the like babble that I can't understand, but I know their parents probably do. Like they just have to share it, have to say it. And sometimes they just want you to be included. They don't calculate. Is this going to be awkward? Like, should I actually say this? Do the people want to hear what I have to say? No, they just get out. They have to, like that song, just get up and praise the Lord. They just have to get up and say something and share, because it's so exciting in their lives. But something changes when we get a little bit older. Something changes when we grow up, because that same excitement is usually not around when kids are getting into be teenagers, and it's definitely not around when people are growing into adulthood. Oftentimes we're still pretty excited to share about certain things, like restaurants we love, a show we're watching, your favorite football team. Like with some things where we are really excited to be able to share and to be able to talk about. But other things, adults tend to be quite a bit more hesitant to share, because we start thinking about, well, what's somebody going to think about me? What might they say about me? As adults, sharing things below the surface can be a little more challenging. I think when I think about people of faith, and if you're somebody who considers yourself a person of faith, maybe you've experienced this when you're thinking about sharing your faith. Because when people of faith think about sharing their faith, it can also often kind of be like this complicated thing. We start thinking about it as like a complicated arrangement, because you're thinking, maybe I have this relationship with this person. We never really talked about faith before, and if I say something, maybe to invite them to my church or to talk about faith, it might change that relationship. Or maybe they might say no if I invite them to something, and maybe that would seem odd. Or maybe they would start to think that I'm judging them because I believe something that I'm not sure if they believe or not. And so it can sometimes, this calculation about things, or really over calculation about things, can keep adults and can keep people from sharing about something that's really important to them. Especially thinking about people of faith. If faith is something that's really important to you, sometimes this calculation of the risk and the reward can keep you from sharing what you want to share. Even though it can be challenging to share faith, I was doing some research into this, and there's some really good news that most Christians, even though it can be challenging and even though there's a lot of complications there, most Christians at some point have invited somebody to church, or have invited somebody and had a conversation about faith with somebody. In fact, some researchers were looking at this, and they discovered that about 60% of folks who are regular churchgoers have asked at least one person to church in the past 6 months or so. And to me, like 60%, that's a pretty high number. And then we start to think, well, if we're going to invite somebody, maybe they don't want to talk about it. But then there's some researchers that even looking even further, and we found that Americans in general are kind of open to having these conversations about faith. In fact, 2/3 of Americans say that they would be open to having a conversation about faith with a friend or a neighbor. And so even though that it's complicated, it's not that nobody is inviting or nobody is interested. It just kind of gets complicated when we start thinking about sharing faith or trying to be like a person of faith towards somebody else. There are people around us who may be more open than we realize, but moving towards them, it still requires something. It still requires something from us, something from you. This month, we've been talking about what it means to love where you live, what it means to just to kind of look around at your neighborhood, at your school, at your household, at your community, and to make those actions of love, to just invest in the love of right where you live. And at the beginning of this series, if you were with us, great. If not, great, because I just want to share it with you. At the beginning of this series, we talked about a lot of what it means to love where you live is just to notice your place, just to notice what's around you, and then to notice a person that's around you. So notice a place that you're at, maybe the doctor's office or a coffee shop or just some place that you frequent, and notice that place. And then as you're noticing that place, name a person that you see there. Maybe somebody you don't talk to regularly or somebody that might need a word of encouragement. And naming your place and noticing a person, these are great places to start. Because it gives you an assessment, just kind of a realization of where you live. Because it's really easy to go through life with your head down. It's really easy to go through life with not noticing what's happening around you, your neighbors, even your friends or your family, and just kind of keep going. So noticing where you are and being intentional about noticing the people around you, like this is a really great place to start. But love cannot stop with noticing. Love cannot stop with just seeing and noticing. There's a difference between seeing somebody and really taking that step and moving towards them. Love doesn't just see, love acts to include. And this isn't just about inviting somebody to church. This is about making room. This is about having a conversation. This is about including somebody in your life, maybe including them in a conversation, maybe including them in your daily routine. And if you are a person of faith, it also involves helping someone take a step towards Jesus, or helping someone just to consider what Jesus might have for them in their life. And if the research is to be believed, this is something that people are open to. 2/3 of your neighbors are open to having a conversation about faith from a friend. And so if you are going to love where you live, you've got to act. If you are going to love where you live, you have to act on it. Just as some neighbors did when they brought their paralyzed friend to meet Jesus. Today I want to tell you a story that Mark tells us, and Mark is a book in the Bible in the New Testament. We talk about Mark as the Gospel of Mark, and all that means is that it tells us about the good news of Jesus, about the good news of Jesus' life and ministry. And I want to tell you a bit about what happens in Mark chapter 2 when some people bring somebody to include them into the life of Jesus. And what's happening here is that this is at the very beginning of Jesus' ministry. He's just kind of started. He's been baptized by John, if you know that story. If you don't, it's okay. He's called his disciples, just those that are going to be walking and doing life with him, those closest to him. And then he's become ministering and healing people. And as he's been healing people, he's gotten kind of a reputation, and people get excited because people like to be healed. And so they seek out Jesus and they want to be next to him. And news is spreading about Jesus through the whole region. And then Jesus makes a trip home to his adult home in the town of Capernaum. And people, when he gets there, they're excited and they come out to visit Jesus. Here's the way Mark describes what's going on in Mark chapter 2. He says this, that after a few days, Jesus went back to Capernaum, and people heard that he was at home. So many gathered that there was no longer space, not even near the door. And Jesus was speaking the word to them. Some people arrived, and 4 of them were bringing a man who was paralyzed. So the crowd is coming in. They want to see Jesus. And then Mark tells us that some other folks arrived, and 4 of them were carrying a friend of theirs who was paralyzed. So I want you to try to imagine this. In first century Palestine, life was a very public life. A lot we do in life is private. We value our privacy. Even the most public people amongst us value privacy because we close our doors at night. We have like privacy from the outside, and but that was not the case in the first century. In the first century, homes were often the front door of the home would often be right on the street, and so when you open your door, people would open their door in the morning, and the passersby could just look in and see what's going on, and be like, hey Jim, how you doing? Like, as you're making your coffee in the morning, hey, I heard your kid crying last night. Why are you such a bad parent? Like, all this stuff is happening, right? All this stuff is happening at the same time. And so when Jesus gets to this house, gets to his home, they open the door in the morning and people just start coming in. They're like, oh, there Jesus is here. All right, well, I guess it's our time to go see Jesus. And so people are crowding in the house, jammed and piled around the doors and the windows, no room to move. And maybe, they're just like hoping that the fire inspector doesn't show up because they're like, this is a fire hazard, but they're just piling in around Jesus and around this house. And then we encounter another group of people. And this other group of people, they weren't the first ones to get there. They weren't the early birds who got in the door and got right next to Jesus. Instead, the Bible says that there are 4 people who come carrying a man who is paralyzed. Love doesn't just see, it acts to include. And these 4 are acting to include this man and trying to bring him to Jesus, but they encounter a bit of a problem. They encounter a barrier because the crowd is piling in. The crowd is piling in, and if you're a single person, you might be able to navigate and push your way in to get closer to Jesus. But here's these 4, really 5 people, and they can't just power their way through. They're blocked. And then Mark tells us what happens next in verse 4. They couldn't carry him through the crowd. So what do? You walk up on the roof and tear open the roof. That's what they do. Okay, so they tore off part of the roof above where Jesus was. Then when they had made an opening, they lowered the mat on which the paralyzed man was lying. So these 4 knew that things can get complicated when you try to bring somebody to Jesus. They know that life can get complicated when you try to introduce somebody to Jesus, to help somebody experience the love of Jesus, but they aren't deterred by these complications. They get on the roof and start tearing it open. Can you imagine this? This seems so bizarre. Now, the first century, in first century Palestine, the roof of a home was not like the roof that is likely on your home. Because what it would be is the roofs would be flat. Now, I know around our community, there's some flat roofs on houses, so forget that if you live in one of those houses. But for everybody else, the roof would be flat on these homes. And what would often happen is people use this roof as extra house space. And when it was hot or something, they would go out on their roof and just relax, and it was a place to spend time. And so there would be an exterior staircase that led up to this roof. So that's where these 5 people, these 4 carrying this other man, they walk up this exterior staircase to get on top of the roof, and they're like, all right, what's next? Well, let's break the roof open. And so they start digging, and it's dramatic. But the way the roof would have likely been constructed is that there were beams that were about 3 feet apart. And in between these beams, there was brush and debris that would be piled in with clay on top of it. So it's the water's not getting through. It's going to provide safety and privacy, but it's also something that is easily kind of broken into and easily dug up. It's not like somebody's climbing on your roof, cutting through the asphalt shingles, trying to get through the OSB, deck, like the roof deck, and then really get in that way. It's a little bit easier. But even though it's easier, it's destructive and, but imagine, out of the norm. Friends, this is not a passive concern that these friends are experiencing. These 4 know their place, and they noticed a person who was often overlooked, and they made a connection. And their concern and their love for this person is manifest in action. Love doesn't just see, it acts to include. And their goal was simple. We need to get this guy to Jesus. They saw the need. We need to get this guy to Jesus. What else can we do? I don't know, but we need to get this guy to Jesus. They didn't know what Jesus was going to do, but they wouldn't let the complication, the complexity, or the barrier keep them from acting in love and bringing this guy to Jesus. And then Mark tells us what happens in verse 5. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "Child, your sins are forgiven." Now, Jesus sees their faith. Jesus sees what's happening. This group didn't tell Jesus about their faith. They acted on their faith, and Jesus sees this. Jesus sees this. They carried, they dug, they lowered. They didn't just see, they act to include. Jesus sees their faith. And then after Jesus speaks this and pronounces this forgiveness, he heals the man. And the man picks up his mat, gets up, and walks out the door. Somebody's been hurting for years and years and years. You know, the friends, they are not responsible for the man's healing. They didn't forgive this guy's sins. They didn't heal this guy. They are not the ones who changed his life. That was all about Jesus. Their role was to act to include and bring him to Jesus. You cannot manufacture somebody else's encounter with God. You just can't do it. You can do certain things, but you cannot manufacture somebody else's encounter with God. Your job isn't to fix people or to force people to believe, but you can love. You can make room. You can help them get closer to Jesus and trust Jesus with what happens next. And when I think about this, I think about the different people who are involved in this story. We've got the 4 that are carrying this guy to Jesus. We've got the crowd who's just trying to see Jesus themselves. And even though they're just trying to see Jesus themselves, they kind of act as a barrier to those that really need Jesus. And so when I think about this story, I have to ask myself this question, and maybe you can ask yourselves too. Am I making it easier or harder for someone to experience the love of Jesus? Am I is my life making it easier or harder for someone else to get close to Jesus? Now, I don't mean that you're intentionally making things harder. The crowd around Jesus, they weren't trying to exclude somebody. They weren't actively trying to be jerks. I mean, they just want to be near Jesus themselves. But regardless, they have become part of the barrier. You see, you don't have to be hostile to outsiders to become a barrier to other people. I mean, this house is full of people who are just wanting to see Jesus. But somehow, somebody who desperately needs Jesus can't get through the door. And this can happen to us too. This happens in churches too. I mean, the risk for people of faith is to be like the crowd in this house. You know, maybe you love Jesus. Maybe you love your church. Maybe you love your friends, and you love maybe where you sit and the activities that you do in faith and in church. And if Jesus were to come to town, I mean, what would you do? You would probably get up early. If you got the card, oh, Jesus is in town, you would probably get up early because you knew people would be lining up, and you would try to get there as soon as you can to be close to Jesus, to learn from Jesus, maybe to hear what Jesus has to say in your life. Maybe you've got a pain in your life, and you're like, I need some healing too, and so you just try to get close to Jesus, get there as early as you can. And I think most people of faith would do what the people in the crowd did. They would crowd in, get to the door, press in to hear what Jesus might have to say to you. You know, sometimes we get so caught up in our own needs that we don't make room for others. Sometimes we get so caught up in our own desires, our own faith, our own kind of like routines and schedules that we don't make room for those who are missing. Or maybe it's something else. Maybe it's like your busyness or your routines, your fear that inviting somebody might make it awkward for your relationship. And none of these things are terrible things. I mean, they're not. They're perfectly ordinary, reasonable things that we want to be near to Jesus, that we want to avoid being awkward and hurting relationships. I mean, I get that. But ordinary things can still be barriers. Ordinary things can still be barriers that keep people from experiencing the love of Jesus. But when you love where you live, you make room. When you love where you live, you make room. You were invited to be like the four in the story, to act, to include, to bring someone to Jesus. Love doesn't just see, love acts to include. Am I making it easier or harder for someone else to get close to Jesus? And the first thing you can do as you consider this question is just to name what part of your life might be acting as a barrier. What part of my life might be keeping somebody from experiencing Jesus? Things like, I'm so busy, it's hard for me to see other people. I'm so busy going from this thing to the next thing that it's hard for me to even see somebody who might be there wanting a conversation. Or maybe you assume that others aren't interested, or it might be an awkward interaction, or maybe you want to share about your faith and invite somebody to church, but you're just waiting for that perfect opportunity, and it doesn't ever present itself exactly the way that you think that it should, and so you just wait. And you don't have to beat yourself up over this answer. That's not what this is about. Just name, what is that barrier? Is there something in my life or my routine that is unintentionally making me a barrier for somebody else meeting Jesus, for somebody else receiving the love of Jesus? And naming the barrier is good, but I also want to tell you that removing the barrier, it's not the end goal. Because the goal of this whole thing is not just to be more available to people, to generally more available. Now, that could be a goal in your life, just to generally be more available to people, but that's not the goal here, because love always has somebody in view. So it's not this idea, I'm just going to be generally more available and whatever happens, happens. It's also that love has somebody in view. And so once you identify this barrier, you can go back to that person that you see around you and just remember that person, identify that person. Maybe it's that person at work. Maybe it's a neighbor. Maybe it's another parent you see at the school or the drop-off line. Maybe it's somebody at the coffee shop or the doctor's office or one of the other places that you frequent in life. And you don't have to figure out how to reach everybody, but just who is that person? I mean, the four people in Mark's story, they didn't try to save the whole town. They didn't try to take everybody to Jesus. There was just this one guy who crossed their path, and they're like, you know what? I can't do everything for everybody, but we can figure out how to get him to Jesus. So who is that person that God has put in your path? And once you name the barrier and name the person, there's one more thing that you can do to make room. One more thing that you can do to turn love into action. And that's just to pray for an opportunity. Just to pray for an opportunity. God, give me an opening. God, help me recognize an opportunity to move towards this person in love. Now, if you were waiting for some big revelation, prayer might seem anticlimactic. I mean, really, it seems so ordinary sometimes to just say, "Oh, pray about it." The preacher says, "Pray about it," and well, fair. That's a pretty good answer. Just pray about something, anything going on in your life, just pray about it. And I realize that is kind of a pretty good preacher answer, but prayer does something powerful, because prayer primes your heart. Prayer helps you open up to the possibilities around you. Prayer makes things possible through the power of God that otherwise wouldn't be possible. And so when you pray and when you ask God, help me to see somebody, help give me an opportunity to move towards this person in love, it prepares you for action, but it also makes you attentive to things that God might already be doing. Love doesn't just see, it acts to include. And this is where prayer and action meets, because when you ask God for an opening, you then also have to be ready to recognize when it's there and to step forward into action. Because when the opening comes, love moves. Now, I want to warn you, this opening probably, maybe sometimes, but this opening probably isn't going to have this flashing neon sign outside that says, this is your opportunity to talk about Jesus. There's probably not a welcome banner that's like, okay, guess what, Will? Now this person right here, you've got to go talk to them, and you need to tell them about Jesus, or you need to ask this person how their life is going. That's not how this usually happens. Usually it's much more subtle. It's that coworker that you meet in the morning that normally says, yeah, I'm fine. But today they said, I'm really struggling. I'm really tired. my kids are sick. I don't know. My wife is upset with me. Like, I'm not sure what to do in life. They just confess that they're struggling. And you can say, oh man, that's really hard, and walk away, or you can engage. Or maybe it's that neighbor, and you wave to that neighbor every day as you go get your mail, or maybe you see them walking their dog, and you usually just go in and say hi and walk back out. But for some reason today, you've got an extra 10 minutes, and you linger, and you stop, and you talk, and you ask a question. Or maybe it's another parent you know who mentions that their family just feels like it's going through the motions from activity to activity, and like, we're really kind of lonely. We really don't have much family here, and we really need some help, and we really would like to be with other people, whether they express it as friends or community relationships. We just need something else. Or maybe it's someone who tells you that they're going through something difficult in life, and you have the opportunity to say, can I pray for you? And maybe the opportunity opens it up where you just say, hey, can we pray right now? And if not, that's okay, but then pray for them. The point of this is you don't have to manufacture the moment. You don't have to wait for this like life-altering moment to even happen. You just have to be ready for when they appear. Don't force it, just don't miss it. When the opening comes, love moves. And what happens next, friends, it's not yours to control. I mean, I would like to control everything in this situation. I'd like to figure it all out and be able to orchestrate it and like pull this lever and do this thing. But that's not how relationships work. I mean, that's not how relationships work. You don't have the control isn't yours of what happens next. You can't change somebody's heart. You can't fix what's the brokenness in their lives. You don't have to have the perfect things to say. I mean, these 4 friends that came carrying this paralyzed guy, like they brought him to Jesus, and then Jesus did what only Jesus could do. And that's still our role. We only do 2 things. We love and we make room. We love and we make room. We move towards people. We help bring people closer to Jesus, and then you just trust Jesus with the rest. And so this isn't 3 more things to cram into like this busy schedule. Instead, it's just a way of becoming more attentive to the people around you. It's just a way of becoming more attentive to the needs, the movement of God around you. Like noticing what maybe in my life is keeping somebody from meeting Jesus. Or who's somebody that God's put in my path that might need Jesus, and then just pray for an opening. And I wonder what would happen. I wonder what happened if this just became the norm for us as a church. Now, what if Kern really became a place where we're not only friends when somebody walks through the door? It's really sometimes easy to be friends with somebody when they walk through your door and you're like, hey, good to see you. But what if we're actively and proactively trying to make room for people long before they even got here? Maybe even long before we even met them. Or what if we knew our neighbors so well that we knew when something changed in their life, when something happened, and we were able to reach out? Or what if we became less concerned with practicing our routines and became more attentive to the people that God has placed in the routines? I want us to be a church that is grateful to be in the room with Jesus. I mean, that's part of what it means to be faithful. That's part of what it means to be following after the way of Jesus, that you're faithful and that you want to be in the room. So I want to be a church that's grateful to be in the room of Jesus, but not so comfortable in the room that you quit looking to the door, seeing if somebody else is there. Being faithful and grateful to be in the room, but never so comfortable that we stop looking towards the door for somebody else, looking for somebody that isn't there yet, somebody who may need Jesus. Maybe the kids at my son's daycare, have something to teach us. When they have something that matters in their life, I mean, they don't have the perfect words. Some of them, bless their hearts, like they don't even have words at all. Somehow their parents know what they're saying. But some of them don't have words at all, but they're so excited and they just want to share. And they don't have a strategy. They don't have it figured out. They just want to share the good news in their lives. They want to share it with somebody else. And I know that faith is more personal than showing somebody your Spider-Man t-shirt or there's more vulnerability involved in this. There's more risk. But maybe loving where you live means willing to take some of that risk for somebody else. Maybe loving where you live means willing to take some of that risk for somebody else. So this week, I want to encourage you to identify the barriers in your life that might be keeping somebody from Jesus. Identify the people that God might have been put in your path to make a difference in their lives, and just pray for an opportunity. Pray for an opportunity to open up so that you can act, you can move, act to include, because love doesn't just see, it acts to include. And I want to just give you this invitation. I just want to slow down for just a moment, and I'm going to pray for us in just a moment. But I want to confess to you that for the past few weeks, I've been crazy. I feel like my schedule has been so jam-packed. I was talking with somebody this past week, and I realized I don't think I'd had a day off in about three weeks. And not that there's good things that was happening in there, a lot of family stuff. But I realized in the midst of this, it's so easy to just check things off my list and go from thing to thing to thing. It's so easy to miss the people in front of me. So this week, this past weekend, we had sick kids at home, but I put my phone away, and I was just trying to detach myself from my email, and I did 90% good. Not 100%, but 90% good. And but then I went to go meet with somebody and had visited with somebody and took them communion. And technically that's work. And when I try to put that into my normal schedule, it can be challenging. Not because I don't want to be with people, but just because it can be challenging to fit that in. And but then I got to be with this guy and hear his stories, hear about his family. I got to break bread with him and share communion with him, something that he confessed he hadn't had in a long time. But it's just something that God opened up. And I'm not saying this to pat myself on the back at all, because usually I'm so easy to miss this type of encounter. But I was able to experience what God had opened in my life. It was a powerful thing to me. So I want to invite you to pray for an opening this week. Pray for an opening to bless somebody who is in your path. God, give me an opening. Help me to recognize an opportunity to move towards somebody else in love. Help me not just to see. Help me to act. Help me to make room. Help me to include. Friends, let me pray for you. God, I give you thanks. I give you thanks for your presence in our lives. I give you thanks that you're the one that makes it possible. And Lord, sometimes it's me and us that need your healing touch. But sometimes there's things in our lives that act as barriers from other people seeing your love. So God, I pray this morning, I pray that you would help us identify the barriers in our lives. That if anybody's hearing these words, that you would help them identify the barriers in their lives that is keeping them from connecting others with Jesus. And then just that you would show us an opportunity. To show an opportunity to bless somebody this week. To help somebody see Jesus, to make room for somebody, to act and include them with your life and your love. Amen.